Joseph was the 11th of 12 sons of Jacob, and his mother was Rachel, Jacob's beloved wife. Joseph was born to Jacob in his old age, and because of this, Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. He expressed this favoritism by giving Joseph a richly ornamented robe, often called the coat of many colors. Joseph, at 17 years old, had two significant dreams that further strained his relationship with his brothers. In the first dream, Joseph and his brothers were binding sheaves of grain in the field, when suddenly Joseph's sheaf rose and stood upright, while the sheaves of his brothers gathered around and bowed down to it. In the second dream, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to him. When he told these dreams to his family, it increased the jealousy and hatred his brothers felt toward him, and even Jacob rebuked him, though he kept the matter in mind. One day, Joseph's brothers went to graze their father's flocks near Shechem. Jacob sent Joseph to check on them. When Joseph's brothers saw him approaching, they plotted to kill him out of jealousy. Reuben, the eldest, persuaded them not to shed his blood, but to throw him into a cistern in the wilderness, intending to rescue him later. While Joseph was in the cistern, Judah suggested selling him to a caravan of Ishmaelite traders heading to Egypt instead. The brothers agreed and sold Joseph for 20 pieces of silver. They then dipped Joseph's coat in goat's blood and showed it to Jacob, leading him to believe that Joseph had been killed by a wild animal. Jacob mourned deeply for his lost son. Joseph was sold to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered in everything he did. Potiphar noticed Joseph's success and made him his personal attendant, putting him in charge of his household and all he owned. Because of Joseph, the Lord blessed Potiphar's household. However, Potiphar's wife took notice of Joseph and tried to seduce him. Joseph refused, citing his loyalty to Potiphar and his fear of God. She persisted, but Joseph continued to resist her advances. One day she grabbed his cloak as he fled from her presence, leaving the cloak in her hands. She then accused Joseph of trying to assault her, and Potiphar, upon hearing her fabricated story, had Joseph thrown into prison. Even in prison, the Lord was with Joseph, showing him kindness and granting him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. The warden put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners and made him responsible for all that was done there. The Lord gave him success in everything he did. While in prison, Joseph interpreted the dreams of two of Pharaoh's officials who had been imprisoned, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. The cupbearer's dream featured a vine with 3 branches that budded, blossomed, and produced grapes, which he squeezed into Pharaoh's cup. Joseph interpreted this to mean that within 3 days, the cupbearer would be restored to his position. The baker's dream involved 3 baskets of bread on his head, with birds eating from the top basket. Joseph interpreted this to mean that within 3 days, the baker would be hanged and birds would eat his flesh. Both interpretations came true. Joseph asked the cupbearer to remember him and mention him to Pharaoh, but the cupbearer forgot about Joseph for 2 years. 2 years later, Pharaoh had 2 disturbing dreams. In the first, 7 healthy cows were eaten by 7 thin, ugly cows. In the second, 7 healthy heads of grain were swallowed by 7 thin, scorched heads of grain. None of Pharaoh's magicians or wise men could interpret the dreams. Then the chief cupbearer remembered Joseph and told Pharaoh about him. Pharaoh summoned Joseph, who interpreted the dreams as a revelation from God. The 7 healthy cows and 7 healthy heads of grain represented 7 years of abundance, while the 7 thin cows and 7 thin heads of grain represented 7 years of severe famine that would follow. Joseph advised Pharaoh to appoint a wise and discerning man to oversee the land of Egypt and store surplus grain during the years of abundance to prepare for the famine. Pharaoh was impressed with Joseph's interpretation and his advice. He appointed Joseph as the governor of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. Joseph was given authority over the entire land, and Pharaoh gave him the Egyptian name Zaphanath-Paneah and gave him Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, as his wife. Joseph was 30 years old when he began his service to Pharaoh. During the 7 years of abundance, Joseph collected and stored vast quantities of grain in the cities. When the 7 years of famine began, it affected not only Egypt, but also the surrounding countries. People from all over came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph. The famine also struck Canaan, where Jacob and his family lived. Jacob sent 10 of his sons to Egypt to buy grain, keeping Benjamin, the youngest and Rachel's other son, at home. When Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him, fulfilling Joseph's earlier dreams, though they did not recognize him. Joseph, however, recognized them and accused them of being spies. After questioning them, he imprisoned them for 3 days. On the third day, Joseph released them, but kept Simeon in custody as a guarantee that they would return with Benjamin. He sent the rest back to Canaan with grain and secretly returned their silver in their sacks. When they discovered the silver, they were frightened, thinking it was a trap. The famine persisted, and Jacob's family ran out of grain. Jacob reluctantly agreed to send Benjamin to Egypt with his brothers after Judah guaranteed his safety. They took double the amount of silver and gifts for Joseph. When they arrived, Joseph released Simeon and prepared a feast for them. He was deeply moved upon seeing Benjamin, but kept his identity secret. Before sending them back, Joseph ordered his steward to put his silver cup in Benjamin's sack. After they left, Joseph's steward pursued them, accused them of stealing the cup, and found it in Benjamin's sack. The brothers returned to Joseph's house, where Judah pleaded for Benjamin's release, offering himself as a substitute. Joseph could no longer control his emotions and revealed his identity to his brothers. He wept loudly and embraced them, reassuring them that it was God's plan for him to be in Egypt to save lives. He instructed them to bring their father and families to Egypt, where they would be provided for during the remaining years of famine. Pharaoh approved of Joseph's plan and provided wagons and supplies for the journey. Jacob and his family moved to Egypt, settling in the land of Goshen. Jacob was overjoyed to see Joseph alive and well. He blessed Pharaoh and lived in Egypt for 17 more years. Before his death, Jacob blessed his sons, giving a special blessing to Joseph's 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. After burying Jacob, Joseph's brothers feared that he might seek revenge for their past actions. They sent a message to Joseph, asking for forgiveness, claiming it was Jacob's dying wish. Joseph reassured them, saying, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." He forgave them and promised to care for them and their families. Joseph lived to be 110 years old, witnessing the growth and prosperity of his family in Egypt. Before his death, he made the Israelites swear to carry his bones out of Egypt when God led them to the Promised Land. Joseph's faith in God's promises remained strong until the end. The story of Joseph is a powerful narrative of faith, forgiveness, and God's sovereignty in using even the most difficult circumstances to bring about his purposes. It highlights the themes of redemption, providence, and reconciliation, serving as a profound lesson in trust and perseverance.